What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to America's Finest Sports. It's Monday. Matt and I are talking the NFL. We got a couple of different good segments for you guys. First off, we're going to be talking about a rival of the Chargers in the AFC West. We're going to be talking about the Las Vegas Raiders and whether or not we think, they are legitimate contenders, because obviously they made a lot of changes in this offseason. But we want to talk about, whether or not Derek Carr and this team can really win the Super Bowl. And then we're going to get into a couple of other topics, do a couple of top fives, do a top five on top five running backs, do a top five on top five front sevens in the NFL. And we'll also be talking about Travis Etienne and how exactly he'll be used at Jacksonville and how effective he could potentially be, in his pseudo rookie season after he was, out for the year last year. But Matt, let's start it off. And I'm going to ask you a really simple question. Are the Las Vegas Raiders contenders this season?
I think they're going into it with the assumption that they are a contender. Now, I think there's kind of two types of contenders in the NFL. There's playoff contenders and there's Super Bowl contenders. Are you a true Super Bowl contender? Now, you can always end up kind of getting close and kind of getting hot at the end of the year, similar to how the Bengals did last season, right? But the Bengals were more of a playoff contender heading into the year, and then they end up making the Super Bowl. So props to them, right? But I feel like heading into the season, I feel like we can say the Raiders are definitely, clearly playoff contenders. You go and you get Josh McDaniels. You bring in Derek Carr. You re-sign Derek Carr. You bring in Devontae Adams. You add a bunch to that offense, and you're like, okay, we're going to be this high-powered offense. We're going to be able to slug it out in the AFC West. Are they legit Super Bowl contenders? That's where it gets a little bit hard for me, because I want to say yes, because they got all these pieces. They got the veteran quarterback, and I think if you ask their fans would say yes. I think if you ask the team, anyone in the management, they would truthfully believe that they are Super Bowl contenders. But can we really look at the AFC West and go, yeah, all four of these teams are Super Bowl contenders? Because on paper, overall, the Raiders are probably the worst. And that's not to knock the Raiders. I still think they're probably over a 500 team. I think they still could make the playoffs if they're worse in that division. That's how good it is. But it's going to be really hard to expect them to go into that season and be true contenders and make a Super Bowl run, because you have one of the most ridiculous divisions I've seen in my entire life in the AFC West. They're going to be in shootouts, 6 times a year with those teams. So I find it hard to call them true Super Bowl contenders. Are they close? Yeah. Are they a playoff contender? 100%. I think they should, I don't know if they should make the playoffs, but they should definitely be in the mix come the end of the season. But I don't know, just because of the division. I think if they're not in the division, I think you say yes. But just because of that division, it's going to be really tough for them to be legit contenders come the end of the year.
I think that's a fair kind of statement, because, can a division have 4 Super Bowl contenders? I understand that it's most likely that not all of them are going to make the playoffs. But at the same time, I do think they're all Super Bowl contenders. I do think the Raiders are Super Bowl contenders. When I look at that division, and I look at the overall rosters, do the Raiders probably have the worst overall roster? I would probably assume yes. I think the Chiefs and the Broncos are the top 2. It's all very, very close, though. But when I look at the quarterbacks, they're all quarterbacks that I think I can rely on. And Derek Carr is one of the most slept on quarterbacks in the NFL when it comes to clutch performances. When this guy, back, a few years back, and it was like, oh, Carr MVP. Then he got hurt, and then he, kind of struggled a little bit. But they also lost all their wide receivers. Initially it was Carr, Cooper, Crabtree. And, that wasn't the best wide receiver duo in the NFL, but Carr was slinging with those guys. And then it was like, okay, here's Henry Ruggs. Go do that again. And it was like, come on, guys. I can't really do that. And he had Waller. He had Josh Jacobs. But he finally this offseason has gotten that guy. And he got Devontae Adams. And Devontae Adams, we know, the best wide receiver in the NFL. I think it's hands down. I think he's the best route runner in the NFL. He gets incredible separation. He's got very good hands. And he gets to pair that with Darren Waller, and he gets to pair that with a great slot wide receiver in Hunter Renfrow. Josh Jacobs and that run first, initially was John Gruden style of offense, where it's like, oh, let's just pound the rock, and then we'll hit him with a spider 2-wide banana. Josh Jacobs is like the last piece in this offense, which I think is a benefit to this team. Because Josh Jacobs initially, it was like Josh Jacobs, the most inefficient 1 yard running back in the NFL, and he was supposed to be this. Oh, he'll get you a short yardage distance, but he like just could not get 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 goal line runs. Now I look at this team and I say, okay, what do they have? They've got a clutch quarterback that has proven he can do it, game in, game out. They've got an elite wide receiver. They've got an elite tight end. They've got, I think will be a very solid coaching staff. And finally, they got game breakers on the defense. Max Crosby as a number 2 pass rusher is scary. It's very, very scary. Because Chandler Jones, Matt, we've talked about it, dozens of times, throughout our podcasting careers. Chandler Jones is probably the most underrated edge rusher in recent NFL history, if not all of NFL history. I mean, this guy gets no recognition, has as many sacks. I think he may have more sacks in his career than Von Miller. Super consistent, just comes in, dominates. And now you put him, and it's like, okay, you've got 2 elite players rushing the passer. That's enough to get a couple of sacks and allow this offense to take over. And they've shown, I'm sorry, Chargers fans, they've shown they can beat the Chargers. They did it to make the playoffs in the biggest game that they had all season long. Derek Carr is a guy that I trust with the game on the line. And whether or not they make the playoffs, I don't think that takes away from if they were contenders for the Super Bowl. Because they may be a 9-win team this year. But they're going to be the best 9-win team in the NFL if they win only 9 games. They're a more of a contender than I think any team in the AFC South. So for me, it's like, yeah, the AFC South, they're going to make the playoffs and stuff like that. They may beat, the Titans or the Colts. They may win 11, 12 games. But the Raiders are going to be better than them. So it's like, for me, I feel like they are contenders because in the playoffs, they can beat any team in the playoffs. And they can do it consistently. It's not, if Derek Carr gets hot, if Devontae Adams is playing well, it's like, no. They can beat any team, any given day. And you would expect them to beat almost any team, any given day. This is not a team I would want to play. This is a team that I am scared of. Even if I'm a team in the AFC West, there's no off games in that division. Because they're all teams that are trying to make the playoffs, and every single game between that division is going to feel like a playoff game. I hope we get a ton of flexed primetime games in that division because they're all going to be intense. They're all going to be great games. And they're all going to be really physical. I do think they're contenders because I think they have all the pieces to be in that Super Bowl contending team. It's going to come down to the end of the season. And if they make the playoffs, they're so easily a contender if they make the playoffs. And I think even if they don't, it's like, yeah, they were contending for the playoffs because they were contending with maybe a team that makes it to the Super Bowl. Them and the Broncos are fighting it out. And it's like, oh, the Broncos made the wild card. Oh, but then the Broncos made it to the Super Bowl because they were clearly better than the team they matched up against in the first round. This team is definitely a contender. Do not sleep on the Raiders. They are much improved. And they made the playoffs last year when they were not expected to. A lot of people expected the Chargers to run away in Week 18. Just dominate them. I think it was Sunday Night Football, not Monday Night Football, and they just went out there and the Raiders just surprised a lot of people. And it was like, no, that's Derek Carr. Derek Carr does that.
So I think that you bring up some of the improvements that they made over this offseason. Now, one, Chandler Jones, massive, right? But I think probably the biggest improvement that they made was in the coaching department. One, you had all the John Gruden stuff over the last few years, and that, and then you have an interim coach last season. But Josh McDaniels, I'm very interested to see how this offense looks just because you have some similarities, I feel like, to some of the New England offenses. You have, you're going to have a run game where they're not going to just use Josh Jacobs. They're going to use Zamir White. They're probably going to use Brandon Bolden, Kenyon Drake out of the backfield as well. So, they have some legit backs here. They have really good backs. They have some pretty solid players on the offensive line as well. Not like the same interior that they had a few years ago when Derek Carr had that like MVP caliber season, but still not too bad. And then you look at the receiving core, you have, the classic Patriots, small, skinny white guy that plays slot wide out in Hunter Renfrow, like, your prototypical guy in the Josh McDaniels offense. And then you have Devontae Adams. You have a legit number one. You also have Darren Waller and Foster Moreau. And they're probably going to run a lot of two tight end sets. You're probably going to see Waller, flexed out wide, standing up once in a while. I'm probably going to see him like on the line of scrimmage as well, but like in tight, like in those kind of formations. But I'm very interested to see what this offense looks like because it should be a lot better than past seasons. And this is the best offensive mind that Derek Carr's played with. So I think that's another huge thing that you're talking about. One, you're getting the best wide receiver you've ever had, like that you've ever played with. Also, Derek Carr actually has played with Devontae Adams before, but you also have your best offensive coach as well. So you have those two things. I mean, and I think when we bring up the contender stuff, that's super. Like, if you look at their improvements, just like them to last year, yeah, they're a lot better. So I think I'm going to kind of jump ship a little bit and side with you with what you're saying. My biggest concern, I guess, is can they even make it out of the division, right? Like, can they even make it to the playoffs? That's the big question because they are a legit team. Now, you look at the defense, you look at their linebackers, not great. You look at their secondary, not great. But they do have a couple stud pass rushers, so that kind of helps cover some of your flaws on defense. And this is a team that's going to be in a lot of shootouts. So maybe if a couple guys emerge in the secondary or in the linebacking core, that could go a long way. But I don't know how confident I am, like in the back end of their defense, to be able to really hang with a lot of these teams. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant to say that they are, just because, okay, how do they stack up against the AFC West? That's my question for you. Because if I'm looking at it, if they jump one of those teams, they outperformed one of those teams' expectations that I have for them. I think that the Broncos, the Chiefs, and the Chargers should all be better than them. So it's hard when you look at it from that perspective. Do you think that I'm right there? Like, because I think there's areas where they're better, but like overall, like it's hard to be like, okay, everything combined, are you going to be better than these teams? Are you going to have a better record than these teams? And I don't know if I can say yes to any of those division rivals.
The thing I'll say, you talk about the back end of their secondary. They were super young last year. Trayvon Merrick, I felt like, was the best safety in last year's draft class. He's coming into year two. Divine Diablo was another safety in last year's draft class. Bigger body. He ended up converting to linebacker. And we'll see how he's able to make that transition. It's a very young secondary, with a lot of these players. And so if those guys are able to make the jump that they could potentially do, it's going to look very different. Because, a lot of times secondary players, they may struggle in their rookie year, but we don't know exactly if they're going to be able to make that. If they don't make that jump, they're going to struggle, against the Broncos, against the Chargers, against the Chiefs. But if Diablo, they can really make that transition to the players that they were drafted to be. I loved both of them coming out of the draft. I wanted the Ravens to draft both of them, actually. If they can make that transition and become the players that, they were looked at, scouted to become, this could be a really scary defense because Chandler Jones, Max Crosby, they're going to force bad passes. They're going to force interceptions. They're going to force, or at least interception opportunities. If this defense can start taking advantage of those, it's going to be really scary. But if they can't, then it's going to be a poor defense. And you're going to be able to just start mossing people and just start throwing it up because they may not be able to contend. But I feel like I'm expecting a jump from Trayvon Merrick, this year. And I'm really interested to see how Divine Diablo ends up making that transition over to linebacker because he was kind of a box safety hybrid. And we've seen a lot of players that make that switch from safety to linebacker. It ends up working out for their career because, of the, style of defense that they play. So, yes, there are concerns, but if things go as, I think the Raiders are projecting it to go, I think the secondary could look a lot better than maybe it looks on paper right now because they've only played 1 year.
Yeah, and Modric had some great tape at TCU, so he's a guy that definitely could emerge a lot. And second round safety, a lot of times like it takes a year or so at the safety position, especially just because you're going against dudes every single week. So it gets a lot harder, and if you're playing a lot of single high, well, all of a sudden guys are getting downfield a lot quicker than they were in college ball, and especially at TCU, you're probably not going against like the craziest high caliber receivers that maybe you would if you played in, I don't know, SEC, or it kind of depends where you play. But I don't know, dude. I feel like for the Raiders, I like it. I also don't know too much about Diablo, but that is intriguing. And like you brought up that a lot of guys make that conversion. Um, but that's something that's kind of come on like the last few years, right? You didn't used to see that very often, where guys would be like a safety and then convert to linebacker. But there's been a lot of guys who've been able to do it recently. So I like that, like kind of like, okay, you have Jonathan Abram, like you might as well go and do this here. So if it works out, I mean, that definitely will help their linebacking core a lot. Denzel Perriman, not the best, but not, he's a serviceable linebacker. But like I said, like you got a couple star pass rushers that can kind of fix a lot of your flaws just because, okay, you get to a third down and one of them makes a fantastic play. And we see that. We've seen that in the NFL for quite some time where, you know, guys like you're banking on your stars to make plays. And last season, even for the Raiders, the defense was a lot worse. And Max Crosby ended up having a fantastic season where he had a bunch of very very clutch plays. But yeah, that's probably all I got on the Raiders. It's a very interesting team just heading into the season, just because you have so many like high end names, but you look at kind of their complementary guys, and it's not great. But I think that'll probably do it for this one. So I know that the next thing we're going to talk about would be running backs a little bit. So let's get into it. Makana, you can go first. I have my top 5 running back list. This one, I'm not going to lie, this one was really hard just because I think there's a ton of talent at the running back position. And you see guys have kind of on and off years, and oh, this guy had a great year, this guy got hurt. And that happens so much at the position. It's very volatile in terms of when guys are being injured, and how often they're injured. And, oh, this guy's coming off his injured season. We saw, a guy in Dalvin Cook who comes out, right? First couple years, super banged up, and now he's emerged as one of the better running backs in the league. So, Makana, what are your top 5 running backs? Or who are your top 5 running backs?
Yeah, so first off, I'm going to give my top 5 running backs 5-1, and then I will go over all of them individually so then we know the list. You guys can get your angry comments out of the way, but there's legitimate reasonings behind every single thing that I say. So, top 5 running backs, here we go. Number 5, I've got Nick Chubb. Number 4, I've got Mr. Najee Harris. Number 3, I've got Jonathan Taylor. Then I got a gap. All right. Number 2, Mr. Derrick Henry. Number 1, Christian McCaffrey. All right. I'm going to start off and I'm going to go 5-1 and I'm going to explain these. When I look at Nick Chubb, he is one of the most consistent running backs in the NFL. All right. Yes, he plays, in a hybrid running back system, but this guy just consistently is just churning out yards. He's one of the best between the tackle runners in the NFL. He runs with power. He's got breakaway speed. I see him as a extremely similar, but just slightly worse in the pass catching game to Jonathan Taylor. I think they are very similar backs outside of the pass catching ability, and that's why I have Jonathan Taylor above him. But he is just a monster running up the middle, and he's the guy that makes Cleveland's offense run, and has been for the last few seasons. Number 4, Najee Harris. Najee Harris, statistically may not be overwhelmingly great, but that's because he's playing with a bottom 5 offensive line in the NFL. And he's been playing last year he played in a system with Big Ben. Dude wasn't throwing over 25 yards. Everyone knew the ball was getting to Najee Harris, and he was running it very well. Ended up being top 10 in rushing yards. He was actually top 5, number 4 overall in rushing yards. And he was catching the ball well. He's moving well. He's breaking tackles. And it was very clear that he had to be the focal point of that entire offense because he seemed like he was the only playmaker with the ball in his hands. And I love Deontay Johnson. I like Chase Claypool. I like a lot of their players. But when they needed a play, it was get the ball to Najee, whether it's in the flats or handing it off to him, and let him work. He was the drive behind that team, and I feel like because he adds, the pass catching game, and he adds, the ability to run between the tackles and do it all, I love his game. Jonathan Taylor, led the league in rushing last year. He's a great player. He can catch the ball. He can run between the tackles. He's got, one of the fastest top speeds in the NFL. So, he gets space. He's gone. The only thing that I'm looking at him where I'm like, oh, yeah, he could be better is just like, it's difficult to gauge. When you're playing behind the best offensive line in the NFL, it's tough to gauge how good someone is. He's got the best offensive lineman. Maybe you can say Trent Williams, is the best offensive lineman, but like, come on, when we're looking at the interior, the left guard on the Indianapolis Colts, Quentin Nelson, is the best in the NFL. That dude just mauls everybody over. But Jonathan Taylor, he's a very good running back. I'm not trying to disrespect him with number 3. I think, I had difficulty putting, the back 3 in the top 5 where they were. I love all those players. I think they're very similar, and I don't think it's disrespectful to say any of them are 3, 4, or 5. Now the gap. The top 2, I've got Henry and I've got CMC. These 2 you can flip-flop. I like CMC because of what he adds in the passing game. But Derrick Henry, I think people underestimate Derrick Henry. And I don't know why. Derrick Henry played how many games last year? He played in 8. All right, 8 games. All right? This dude ran for 937 yards. Jonathan Taylor played in 17 games. He ran for 1,811 yards. Derrick Henry played in less than half the games and ran for over half the yards. And people forget Derrick Henry's better in the second half of the season. That's when Derrick Henry starts taking off, is week 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. That's when it's just like 200 yards, 200 yards, 200 yards, because everyone gets tired and Derrick Henry just keeps on churning those legs. He's maybe James Harrison's retired, so, we don't have to look at him. He may be the hardest working workout regimen guy in the offseason that we see in the NFL. This dude is an absolute tank, and it shows. You cannot tackle him. He is feared by every player that ever tries to tackle him. I mean, I bet you could call up Josh Norman, and he still hasn't slept since Derrick Henry stiff-armed him, because he just cannot wake up, from that living nightmare. You can't tackle this guy with one person. He's the only player in the NFL at the running back position where it is a true, you need multiple players. And that's the thing that separates Derrick Henry. Then at number 1, I obviously have Christian McCaffrey. I think people look at Christian McCaffrey and they say, it's a white running back. His father is a Hall of Fame wide receiver. He's a pass-catching running back. He's a third down back. And people look at him, and he's the best pass-catching running back in the NFL. So you can't say, oh, we can't catch the ball. No, he is a phenomenal pass catcher. But he's just as good running between the tackles, and people do not understand that. People watch Christian McCaffrey, and they say, oh, it's a white running back. He's a pass catcher. Give this man the rock. Run I form, run single back, halfback dive, halfback power. This dude will make someone miss in the hole, and he will take off for 20, 30 yards consistently. He is not just pitch it out to him on the outside, type of running back. He's not a Tariq Cohen, right? You run Christian McCaffrey up the middle consistently. He gets you great yards. And then you pass it to him, and he's going to catch the ball as well, maybe as any wide receiver in the NFL. And I think people will say, oh, but Christian McCaffrey, he gets hurt a lot. That's not the question. This isn't best fantasy running backs to draft. This is best running backs, top 5 running backs. When they're healthy, Christian McCaffrey's the best running back in the NFL because he's the entire offense of the Carolina Panthers. There's no other player, maybe outside of Derrick Henry, that you can say, hey, this guy does everything for this team. Christian McCaffrey, when he was playing last year, granted, it was a short stint, the Carolina Panthers had a winning record. Not just a winning record, they were one of the few undefeated teams in the NFL. He gets hurt. How many games did they end up winning? 5 games? Pretty sure they won 3 with Christian McCaffrey. So they lost him, and it was like, oh my gosh. Everyone's all like, oh, Chuba Hubbard, fantasy football stud. And everyone was like, wait, never mind. Chuba Hubbard looks like he's horrible. Why? Because Christian McCaffrey's that good that you can run an entire offense through him. There's very few players in the NFL where you can say, hey, he's your entire offense. You can't say that. I don't think you can say that about Jonathan Taylor. I don't think you can say that about Najee Harris. Can't say that about Nick Chubb. The only other guy you can say that about is Derrick Henry, and that's why I have that gap.
Okay, I think it's fair. Now, I will say I do my rankings a little bit different because I do value injury or ability to really carry an offense. I'm accounting that into it, and that's why rankings are hard. Just because you look at it and you're like, okay, well, what's top 5? Like, what's like, the best running back to me compared to you? It might be a little bit different. It's not like it's like, okay, we're doing top 5 fantasy backs, like you were saying, because then it would change a little bit. Then you're looking at the offenses around him, the stuff around him. But my top 5 from 5 to 1, I think there's 7 guys that you can bring up that are like the elite backs. That's what my opinion is. So 5 to 1, I got Alvin Kamara, Najee Harris, Christian McCaffrey, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry. Now, if I'm looking at it talent-wise, I'm probably going to move McCaffrey up, right? Just in terms of talent. But the question is, because I think that you're absolutely true. When you're talking about guys that are in between the tackles runner, Christian McCaffrey has been a extremely elite in between the tackle, inside, outside runner since he was in Stanford. And that's why he put up ridiculous numbers at Stanford. In the NFL, we see him take a ball in between the center and the guard and not get touched for 80 yards. He does that occasionally. That's the thing. So that's part of it. But then we look at Derrick Henry, and I know Derrick Henry's it's bad because he got hurt last year. But like, come on, how many carries had this guy had in the NFL? How many? He had never really missed a game before last season when it was like, oh, he broke his toe, like, and he still comes back like 3 weeks early, right? So I think Derrick Henry's your number one. And I think that you can look at it and you can make the argument. You can make the argument for a lot of guys. Okay, well, if Derrick Henry can't be number one because he doesn't affect the passing game as much as like some of the other guys. That's fair, right? Except one caveat. The best play in the sport is the Derrick Henry screen pass because you run it every 3 weeks and it's 40 yards to a touchdown almost every single time. It's absurd. They don't run it very much, but it's just like oh no, like we got to run something. All right, let's just run the screen pass. And it works and it's ridiculous. And Derrick Henry gets the ball 30 times a game. I think Jonathan Taylor is a little bit tough to grade, just like you said, the offensive line is so stacked. Everything's kind of built around him where it's like, okay, yeah, he should be succeeding. He's a great downhill runner. He's an extremely elite runner. I just can't take away what he did last season. He's a pretty good receiver out of the backfield. And I just think like moving forward, him at 23 compared to McCaffrey at 26 or 27, some of their injury history, I'd probably rock with Jonathan Taylor from here on out. I get why though, Makana. I get why you have McCaffrey higher, and I love Christian McCaffrey. After that, Najee Harris at number 4. After McCaffrey at 3, Najee Harris, he's going to be number 1 on this list at some point in his career. Like he's going to like when he's a little bit older, when he's a couple years in the league, and we see him with a better offensive line, we're going to realize, oh wow, this guy is a really good runner. Now you look at his yards per carry, efficiency, stuff like that. It's not quite there. And that happens to a lot of rookie backs. You dance a little bit when you have a great offensive line. Like the vision isn't quite there that it's going to be probably in a few years, and he's going to develop that I think a little bit more. And the Steelers, what they should be doing is they should be trying to build the best offensive line around him as possible. They should be trying to do what the Colts did. But this is a guy that as a rookie caught 74 passes because his team basically couldn't run the ball because their offensive line was too bad. Like that's what he's able to do. He is 6'2" or 6'3" and like 230, 240 pounds. He hurdles guys. He sidesteps multiple players in the backfield, dances through the hole. Like he is so quick for how much he weighs and how heavy he is and how violent of a player he is, that this is one of the craziest athletes we've seen at the running back position. So I expect him eventually to be like a number 1 guy, but I have him at 4 this year, I guess, going in. It's that's the thing, dude. It's really hard. Like, all right, yeah, I would be so happy like if the Niners had him. Like it would be like I would absolutely love Najee Harris on my team. And then at 5, this one was really hard. I think there's 3 guys that you can bring up. I think you can bring up Dalvin Cook. I think you can bring up Nick Chubb like you did, and I think you can also bring up Alvin Kamara. The only reason why I took Alvin Kamara, and I think it's hard because like Nick Chubb is a better runner than Alvin Kamara. Dalvin Cook is probably a better runner than Kamara, but Alvin Kamara just has like. And this is also another part where it's kind of hard. If we're talking like gadget pieces and stuff, you're probably going to bring up Kamara in that discussion with, the Christian McCaffreys, the Deebo Samuels, right? Like guys like that, just because he's used so much in the passing game. He can line up as slot. He can kind of do whatever. But when I'm thinking of like superstars at the running back position of just like get the ball in his hands and let him figure it out, let him, run the offense through him, that's the guy because that whole offense has ran around him for years now. I get that MT's there, and MT's been a huge part of that. You have to really focus on him. The linebackers have to really focus on MT coming across the middle. That's a huge thing that's been able to help him. But also, whenever the Saints are in a pinch and they need to score, they need something, they're giving the ball to Kamara, and Kamara's been absolutely fantastic throughout his career. So I'm putting him at 5, but if someone says, yo, you guys are sleeping on Dalvin, that's fair, man. I get it. Like, Dalvin's great. Same thing with Nick Chubb. So I think there's some other guys that can be discussed, but that is my top 5 list.
Yeah, I like how you brought up, there's 7 guys. I wrote honorable mentions. I had Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara. So we're right on with the top 7. The thing that I want to add in, talking about Jonathan Taylor, because I think a lot of people look at the statistics and they say, wow, when was the last time a guy rushed for 1,800 yards other than Derrick Henry? We added an extra game to the NFL regular season. So I think when people are looking at all of these positions and they see all of these guys putting up all of these great stats, and they look at the totals, and it looks a lot more impressive than, it's very impressive. I'm not trying to take away 1,800 yards, however many games you play, very impressive. Would have been 1,700 yards or whatever. Still an impressive number. But we do have to take into consideration that it is an extra game. They do play an extra game. And I think that's just something, I'm not trying to say, oh, that was the reason why I took him back. But I just want to point out, hey, the numbers over the next couple of seasons are going to be higher than in previous seasons, okay? So when, next year, if another running back rushes for 1,700, 1,800 yards, I don't know who it is. Maybe it's, Nick Chubb. Maybe it's Derrick Henry, whatever. It's like, okay, they did play an extra game. Christian McCaffrey put up the 1,000 season, I believe in the last year that he was healthy, which was 3 seasons ago. Derrick Henry had the 2,000 yard rushing season. These are seasons in a 16-game season. It's like right after O.J. Simpson set the NFL record for most rushing yards per game in a single season. He averaged over 140 rush yards per game. In my opinion, still the greatest single-season rushing season of all time. 2,000 yards in a 14-game season. Never been done. Still, to this day. These numbers are going to be affected, whether it's ranking running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers. The numbers are going to be changing. The standards are going to be sliding of how many yards they need to be considered elite, how many rushing touchdowns and things like that. And also, just finally, when you're ranking guys, don't look at fantasy totals. All right? Austin Eckler, not in this conversation. Not in this conversation, all right? I get he's a great fantasy option. I get when you're looking up, who's the best guy to draft in fantasy? Austin Eckler's up there, all right? Doesn't mean he's a top 5 running back in the NFL. I just wanted to throw that out there in case people are like, what about Austin Eckler? What about Joe Mixon? Good players. Very good fantasy players. But we're talking about running back skill. And guys like Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb sucks for fantasy. I hate Nick Chubb in fantasy. He plays in a 2 running back system. Inconsistent with, how many carries he gets per game. But overall, I think I really like the players that we brought to the table. I still think that Christian McCaffrey's on top. But overall, I think that was overall some pretty good lists. But do you want to talk about which subject do you want to talk about next? Do you want to go into Travis Etienne and keep the running back theme, or do you want to keep it with the top 5 team and go into the front 7s? We can do either one. I'm fine with either.
Let's do front 7s first.
All right. So in the NFL, Matt and I think are both believers in the philosophy of building your defense out through the front 7 and then focusing on secondary. Now, obviously, both are important. You can't have a terrible secondary and a great front 7. You can't have a terrible front 7 and a great secondary. But my personal opinion, and it's a difference in philosophy. You can think either way; it's totally fine. The front 7 is the most important side or half of your defense. And when you're looking at the best teams in the NFL, most of them, they've got a pretty darn good front 7. So we wanted to look at our top 5 front 7s, and I'm going to let Matt go first on this one. Same thing, 5-1, and then go over them all. Matt, who are the top 5 front 7s in the NFL? And in case people don't know, totally fine if you don't know, front 7 is defensive line and linebackers. Just to set that straight.
Yeah, so I'll go 5-1. I'll start with honorable mentions. So I have 3 teams in my honorable mentions. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, last couple years, they would have definitely been there. Lost a couple guys. Also brought in a couple guys. But they're just going to be on the outskirts for me. If you had them in your top 5, Makana, I don't know yet. That's fine. Commanders, another honorable mention, and then the Patriots as well. The Commanders have one of the best defensive lines in the league, but their linebacking core sucks. I'm sorry, but it's not good. So it kind of hurts them a lot because, when you're thinking of like, oh, like who's the best like defensively in terms of your D lines. Commanders are definitely going to be in that discussion. But unfortunately, I couldn't bring him in. And then Patriots, they might not have like the name brand guy, so that's why I wasn't able to bring him in. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if we end up seeing the Patriots, like performance wise at the end of the year, be a top 5 front 7 team, just because they consistently have a lot of depth, very well coached. Matthew Judon is a perfect scheme fit, but in terms of like overall talent, I just couldn't bring myself to put them into the top 5. So 5-1, my top 5 front sevens. At number 5, the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, if you haven't really been paying attention to what the Eagles have been building, it is extremely impressive. They have the deepest defensive line in the entire league. They have Brandon Graham, who's been a little bit older now, Fletcher Cox. They draft Jordan Davis. Jordan Davis is currently on their depth chart, is listed as a backup. Javon Hargrave, Josh Sweat. Then their linebacking core, Hassan Reddick as well as an edge player. Linebacking core, not quite as good. Kazir White, he didn't play a ton for the Chargers last year, but he's all right. And right now they have TJ Edwards listed as their middle linebacker, but they also drafted Nakobe Dean. Nakobe Dean is one of those guys that slid way down. So I have them at number 5. Number 4, I have the Colts. The Colts have a ridiculous team. They got Darius Leonard. He changed his name to Shaq Leonard, but Darius Leonard, one of the best linebackers, if not the best linebacker in the league. DeForest Buckner, one of the best, interior defensive linemen, if not the best interior defensive lineman in the league. So you got those two guys. They also bring in Yannick Ngakoue, who's been a really solid edge player. Bobby Okereke, I think I said it right, but he was great last year, playing next to Darius Leonard at the linebacker spot. And then also last year they drafted Kwity Paye, who's just a very solid, fundamentally great player. So I really like their D line a lot. And then they have one of the best linebackers, another linebacker that's really good. So I really like what they have in terms of their front 7. At number 3, and my 3 and 2, honestly, I was like up and down. Like, should I put this team 3? Should I put this team 2? I ended up going with the Rams at 3 and the Niners at 2. If you think that the Rams are ahead of the Niners, that's fine with me. However, if we look at the Rams depth chart, like, okay, what's the big thing for the Rams? They got Aaron Donald. They have an absolute stud. They also have Bobby Wagner. Now, he's a little bit older, definitely lost a couple steps, but he's going to be great for them next year. I expect him to be great. Leonard Floyd, another really solid player. And then it's not that great after that. A'Shaun Robinson's all right, but there's just not a ton there after that. And that's why I ended up putting the Niners just a little bit ahead of them, just because the Niners have absurd depth this season. Like, they have such ridiculous depth. Do they have the top end guy like Aaron Donald? No, but they have a guy that's still going to be extremely effective in Nick Bosa. And they also have a much better linebacking core as well, in my opinion at least. You have Fred Warner, Azeez Al-Shaair, and you have Dre Greenlaw. And if you guys don't know those two players well, they're kind of perfect compliments. Like, each of them is a little bit different, but they're perfect compliments to be next to Fred. And the reason why I end up putting the Niners ahead is just because the Niners defensive line now, they've kind of lost some of the names on it the last few years. They don't have DeForest Buckner. We already mentioned him earlier, but they don't have DeForest Buckner, right? However, they still have Eric Armstead. They don't have Dee Ford. Well, they have 2 edge rushers and Samson Ebukam. Ebukam was sweet last season. He was huge down the stretch, and he's a big reason why the Niners had a big playoff run, and got hot at the end of the year. And they also drafted a guy in Drake Jackson. I know it's hard to project rookies coming into the league, but basically what the Niners coaching staff thinks is that they are so surprised that they were able to land Drake Jackson at the end of the second round, because they had him listed as one of their top 20 players in the draft class. And they viewed him as a first-round pick that was used not in the best way at USC because of injuries. So if Drake Jackson is 75% of what they think he is, they have a ridiculous group of a defensive line and a ridiculous group of linebackers. So it's just so complete that's why I ended up taking them ahead. And then at number 1, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Pittsburgh Steelers, they don't have like all of like their complementary pieces that they had the last few years. But at the end of the day, they have TJ Watt, they have Cam Hayward, Devin Bush is a great backer, and they also added Miles Jack, which is just a low-key amazing move. I know he's been banged up and hasn't been quite the guy that he was early on in Jacksonville, but dude, if Miles Jack's can be close to what he was, you might have a ridiculous linebacking core there. And ultimately, the Steelers are always one of the best front 7 teams in the league, where it's like, yeah, a lot of that is coaching. A lot is that just the philosophy, how they're able to scout players. And I guarantee that a couple of these backups this year that are in Pittsburgh are going to be studs for them, or are going to be big time difference makers throughout the whole season. So that's mine. I'll go 1 through 5 again. Number 1, Pittsburgh Steelers. Number 2, San Francisco 49ers. Number 3, Los Angeles Rams. Number 4, Indianapolis Colts. And number 5, Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Makana, you don't agree with me at all. So what is yours? I want to hear.
Yeah, I think this is very different from the running backs. We were pretty similar with the running backs, very similar teams. I've got a pretty different list. Number 1, Baltimore Ravens. Just kidding. That's a joke. Ravens are not in the top 5. But I'm going to go through my 5, 5-1, just like you, Matt. Starting off number 5, I did put the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Number 4, I've got the Cleveland Browns. Number 3, Pittsburgh Steelers. Then I have a gap. I've got the Rams at 2, and I've got the Niners at 1. So starting off, Tampa Bay. I know they're getting older. I know they lost. What?
Who is 3?
Number 3 was the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Okay. Gotcha. I didn't hear you say.
Yeah. So starting off, Tampa Bay. I know they've lost a couple of pieces, but they've got still some of the best at their position. Shaq Barrett, very solid pass rusher. I really loved Joe Tryon coming out of UW last season. He did not play college football the year before he got drafted. So last year was his return to football. I believe he sat out due to COVID was the reasoning, but last year was his first year back playing football. He should be improved this year. They took him with their final pick in that first round. Him next to Shaq Barrett is going to be really solid. I love their linebacker duo. I know Levante David isn't the same player he used to be. He used to be, in my opinion, the best linebacker in the NFL for maybe a couple of seasons, right after Luke Kuechly retired. But they also have Devin White playing next to him. I think that's very complimentary. Levante David, very smart, and then Devin White is just zipping across the entire field with that crazy speed of his. But then they have a defensive lineman by the name, I'm not pronouncing his full name because I don't know if anybody has his full name memorized outside of his parents. Vita Vea. Vita Vea, as a defensive tackle, is the best at what he does. He is the best big dude that you can have in the NFL. Now, maybe Jordan Davis rivals him this year. We're yet to see that. But Vita Vea, if you need a guy to stand there and take up blockers, he is that dude. It is very difficult to run on Vita Vea. It's also very difficult when they put him in at fullback to try and get by him as a blocker. But Vita Vea, super underrated still, I think, in the NFL. They also have Akeem Hicks, who I think is a solid player. They also have William Goldston. I think this is a very solid front seven right there. I think it's more well-rounded than I think a lot of other teams. Then at number 4, I've got Cleveland. I think Cleveland is super underrated. Now, obviously, they're top heavy with Myles Garrett. I think, I would say top 3 pass rusher in the NFL. They also have, Jadeveon Clowney. I think Jadeveon Clowney is super underrated. Is he the number 1 pass rusher that he was drafted to be? No. But he is an elite run stuffer, and he's a freak athlete on that defensive line. It is very difficult to get around Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney. Their linebackers, I'm also a big fan of. I love Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and I'm also a big fan of the name Taki, even though he's not their number 1 linebacker. But I also really do like Anthony Walker. I think those two are really solid together, and combined with a great pass rush and run defending, I think it's just a very solid, a lot of unsung heroes there, but I think it's a lot of just really good players that are able to make a lot of plays. Number 3, Pittsburgh. Matt, you went over them. I think Cam Hayward, one of the best in the NFL. What he does. Obviously, TJ Watt, sack record last year. I think he tied it. Filthy. Just filthy. I think the Miles Jack move, super underrated. I don't know why that's not talked about at all. But great defensive line. Then I have a gap. The LA Rams at number 2. Aaron Donald. I mean, he is... I've said this before on different podcasts. I believe he's the best football player of all time. Legitimately. I don't think he's had enough time to prove it. And I get people say, well, he's not better than Tom Brady. He's not better than Lawrence Taylor. When you're looking at Lawrence Taylor, I get it. When you're talking about greatness, impact on the history of the game, Lawrence Taylor's that dude. All right, but Aaron Donald has been the best player in the NFL for probably 6 seasons. Maybe since he came into the NFL, people just weren't ready to give him the title. I mean, this dude has come in, has been unblockable, except for when he plays the San Francisco 49ers. Other than that, most dominant player in the NFL. This dude is triple teamed, it seems like, every single play, and he's still able to get through. And he is just an absolute monster. I feel like he hasn't had enough time in the NFL to show that he's the best player to ever play the game, outside of position. Obviously, defensive tackle is not as important as quarterbacks, so, who would you draft number 1 overall in history? You're going with the quarterback. You're going with Brady. But I think Aaron Donald is legitimately the best defensive player of all time. Just hasn't had the time to prove it, which is why he's not greater than greater than Reggie White, greater than Dion and Lawrence Taylor. But you also add in a very good edge rusher next to him that's been very dominant when playing with him, Leonard Floyd. They added Bobby Wagner, and I don't think Bobby Wagner's the same player as he was, 5 years ago. But still, he's a knowledgeable linebacker. Having a smart linebacker behind Aaron Donald, that's all you need. Right there. Like, Aaron Donald's going to allow everyone else to feast. Like, I get they may not have the names outside of Aaron Donald and Bobby Wagner and Shaq. That doesn't matter to me. Like, that's how good Aaron Donald is. Like, he's just that dominant. I don't get why people are like, oh, I don't see him as, like, the best player in the NFL. I'm like, what do you mean? You ever watch the Rams? You ever watched him play football? Like just watch him. Just watch the Rams play defense and just watch him. He may not get the sack, but you'll watch him and it'll be like, oh, he shifts across 3 defensive linemen, forces the lineman to step off of the edge rusher, and then the edge rusher gets through, and you're like, oh, wow. He created that sack, created that pressure, created that pressure, created that pressure, created that run stuff. Like, it's unbelievable watching him play the game of football. But at number 1, I've got the San Francisco 49ers because of the depth that they have, and I think they also have the best linebacker in the NFL. They may have a top 2 linebacker duo in the NFL, but Fred Warner, unbelievably good. Then they have Bosa. Unbelievably good. We saw what Bosa did his rookie year. Just absolutely filthy. He just destroyed Patrick Mahomes in that Super Bowl. A super underrated performance from them. And they just have a lot of other guys. Samson Ebukam, freaky athlete. Eric Armstead switching over to the interior. Like, I just think it's just going to be so difficult to do anything against this front seven, whether you're trying to run the ball or you're just trying to, have time in the pocket to throw a pass. It's going to be really tough to get by this team because everyone on this line is going to be coming after you, no matter who it is. And their stars are also some of the best at their position, if not the best. So that's my 5-1. Matt, I would love to hear, your kind of thoughts on it, but those are my 5.
So I think you can definitely bring in the Bucks. Like, I think that's super fair. I think they have an extremely elite front seven. But for me, the reason I end up having the Colts, I do think that you're sleeping on the Colts a little bit. I do have to say that. I think the Colts are significantly better than the Browns.
They were on my bubble.
Yeah,
I love Buck. I'm not as big a fan as Shaq Leonard as a lot of other people, though.
It's weird to call him Shaq Leonard. He's good though. He's a very good player. And the thing is like all of their other complementary pieces are good. They're not like, oh, this guy's average. No, this guy's like above average to good just across the board. So that's why I like them a lot. The Browns, like, I don't want to knock on them, but like to me, I see like, all right, it's like Myles Garrett, right? And their linebacking core is not that great. Now, Owusu,
Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is probably going to be a Pro Bowler this year. Like, he's good.
Yeah, and that's going to be big for them. But, like, okay, what about the D-line outside of him? Clowney's he's not bad. Like, I think people think that Clowney's just, like, completely washed. He's definitely not. But he's also not prime Jadeveon Clowney. He's not, like, the hype that Jadeveon Clowney got. So your defensive line is kind of average outside of him. Like, you have one good linebacker. Like, I don't know. I just don't love it as much because, dude, the Eagles, like, we were talking about the Niners' depth in terms of their D-line. Dude, the Eagles isn't even, like, close. Like, their backup D-line probably, like, legitimately, dude, probably half of the leagues would rather have those guys than what they're going to roll out as their starters. Like, that's how deep they are. It's absurd. And they're only going to have it for this year because I believe they're going to lose, is it Brand? Yeah, I think they're going to lose Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox next year. But, like, dude, they also got Derek Barnett. I didn't even bring him up. Like, he's, like, that's a backup. Like they got Derek Barnett and Jordan Davis as backups. That's ridiculous, dude. That's absurd. So I was kind of like, I don't know, and I'm not like big. I don't know how good the Eagles are going to be, but they've actually got a really good roster. Like if you start looking, you're like, wait a second, man, wait a second, this is crazy. So I do think that they're getting a little bit slept on, and I think it's fair because like they've just added a couple guys too, and they've like slowly started building it up. But they have a good mix of younger guys and vets. So I'm really excited to see what that team looks like, just because there's some strengths, there's some weaknesses, but damn, dude, some of those strengths are like really, really good. And I like the Colts a lot. I like that we ended up both having the same top three, not in order, but in terms of the three teams. And I think that if you change the order to something else and you end up having the Rams at one because you're like, look, I really think Aaron Donald makes that big of an impact, and I like some of them. I really like the Bobby Wagner pickup. That's fine. I think that's totally fair too. But I think you could go any of the order for those top three, and I think they're all going to be sweet, and I think those are clearly going to be three teams in the top five. So I'm pumped, man. I'm really pumped because I love like when talking about like defensive lines and linebackers and stuff like that. Especially being a Niners fan, that's where they've really decided they're going to put a lot of their assets in, and what they're going to try to build around on the defensive side of football. So it's fun to talk about, and there are some ridiculous players in the NFL right now on the D line, which has been a lot of fun to watch over the past few years.
Yeah, and do you want to get into the final topic? Talk about Mr. Travis Etienne. This is a guy that, this guy was hated on from the minute he was drafted. From just the national media, I felt like it was a poor pick, and that had nothing to do with him. James Robinson had come off of a very good season, rookie season, undrafted, and then they draft him. And they were like, okay, we got Trevor Lawrence's buddy. And they were like, and everyone was like, wait a minute, you got like a lot of holes on this roster. Running back is the opposite of a hole. Like that was maybe the one position where you look at the roster and you're like, they're good there. Maybe get all line. Maybe get defense. Maybe get a wide receiver. And they're like, let's get a running back. And then he ends up getting hurt. Misses all of last season. Finally, I believe he played in the preseason, week 2 of the preseason this year. But let's talk about what we think he will do in this offense, because it's a player that he's been talked about a lot. And this is someone that I looked at. I really wanted the Ravens to draft him because I felt like they would be able to use him as a pass catcher. Line him up at wide receiver, line him up in the slot, line him up at running back, throw him on routes, and just get him the ball in space. And now that's exactly what the Jacksonville Jaguars are talking about doing with him this year. And I feel like he could actually be, I feel like he's going to be the weapon of this entire Jags offense. I think the Jacksonville Jaguars, we clown on them. I think they made the legitimate worst sports. This is including Kyle Singler. This is including Timofey Mozgov. The worst signing in sports in the last decade. Just horrendous. When they gave Christian Kirk, a guy who's never had a 1,000-yard season, they paid this dude $20+ million a year, and they're like, yeah, this guy was wide receiver 3, maybe wide receiver 4 for the Cardinals last year. That's the guy we want. Also, superstar Zay Jones. These are the guys we're bringing Trevor Lawrence. And you're like, what? They are not option 1. It's going to, in my opinion, be like Alvin Kamara in this offense is going to be Travis Etienne. That's my take on it, and I think it's actually going to work pretty well. I've come around on this Jacksonville Jaguars offense. Now, I will say, I was tired of hearing Chris Collinsworth in the Hall of Fame game talk over and over about, this team's just like the Bengals. This is the team everyone's sleeping on coming into the year. This is the team that's going to really surprise a lot of people, Super Bowl type of thing. And I was like, whoa, okay, Chris Collinsworth. I liked, the Travis Etienne's coming back. But stop talking about how they're going to be the Bengals and surprising everyone. And they're like, well, it's because Trevor Lawrence got injured and, Trevor Lawrence didn't win a lot his rookie year. Just because you don't win a lot your rookie year and you were a number 1 overall pick doesn't mean you're Peyton Manning. All right? They didn't go out and get Jamar Chase. All right, this is very different situations, Chris Collinsworth. So stop talking about how this is the sneakiest team in the NFL as a super surprise, everyone. It's not a great roster, but Travis Etienne could make them watchable.
I mean, I liked Travis Etienne a lot coming out of college, coming out of Clemson. Now, a couple things that are concerning, I think, are probably coming off of an ACL, and he had 800 touches in college. That is a lot of touches in college ball. So I think that's probably where, like, in terms of my concerns about him, probably end. Maybe we can talk about like the other pieces on that offense, but in terms of a backfield, yeah, that's a great strength. Like they definitely have a strength there. I mean, they have a true guy in Travis Etienne that can come out, flex out to the slot. And they're probably going to do that quite a bit. They're going to use him as a receiver out of the backfield. They're going to use him as a gadget piece. And you have a guy that's a great in between the tackles runner, and hopefully will be used there a lot more than Travis Etienne will, just because if you use James Robinson in between the tackles and you save Travis's, like you save some touches from him, you saved him getting banged up a little bit, I think that'll go a long way. I think that this offense this running back room could look a lot similar to how Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara did in New Orleans. I think it could be very similar. I don't think they're the same caliber players. I mean, Travis Etienne, I mean, Kamara is definitely better. But I like James Robinson a lot. I don't think they're quite on that level, but I think that the way that they could use him could be very similar. When I watched Travis Etienne at Clemson, the ability, like his balance is absurd, dude. And it reminds me of Alvin Kamara a little bit. And you see him break a bunch of tackles. He's not breaking tackles like stiff arming guys and running guys over. I mean, he's going to do it from time to time, but he's breaking him because they don't get him clean because he's bouncing around and falling forward, and then he catches his feet and he ends up catching up and like ends up having like that second win, and then all of a sudden he's out ahead of everyone because he got tripped up, but he didn't go down. So you see that a lot when you start watching him as a receiver. Early on at Clemson, he wasn't really used there too much. Only 17 receptions over his first two seasons. Then his next two, the next one he goes 37 receptions and then 48 receptions. He has over 1,000 combined yards and 6 touchdowns in those last 2 seasons. So he was an extremely effective weapon out of the backfield once he kind of got going there and got comfortable in that regard. So it's interesting, man. I definitely didn't like the pick either. I thought it was a really stupid pick. But he's probably going to look really good. So I think we do have to bring that up when we talk about him. And I mean, like for a security blanket, I think it's a great person to have with Trevor Lawrence. So like it's a good pairing, but I think it's always going to be one of those picks where it's like, and you even see this with Zeke, dude, because Zeke went before Ramsey, where it's like, oh, the Cowboys screwed up. And like Zeke's had a good career. Like Zeke has, So it kind of reminds me a little bit of that of like, oh, they didn't pick the right guy. Like they didn't pick the right position. Even if he's good, it'll like be kind of taken against him. But in terms of a guy for fantasy, dude, Etienne could be sick. He could be amazing this year because they're probably going to be down a lot in games, and he's probably going to have a ton of receptions. So
people talk about, oh, this guy's going to be the next DeAndre Swift. I never hear Travis Etienne. When people say, oh, this guy's going to be the next DeAndre Swift, they bring up the most random players. They're like, oh, yeah, this guy. And it'll be like some backup running back on some random team. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Travis Etienne, I think, is a better running back, period, than DeAndre Swift. I think he's a better pass catcher, period, than DeAndre Swift. He's got a better quarterback than DeAndre Swift. The only thing he doesn't have is an offensive line. But his value, when you're looking at him from a fantasy standpoint, it's catching the football. And, oh, does he have any chemistry with his quarterback? I don't know. Did they win a national championship together in college? I think so. Were they like the most deadly duo in college when they played together? Yes. That's why they drafted him. I know Urban Meyer was the coach back then, and Urban Meyer, this dude was doing some weird stuff. And I'm not even talking about kicking people. This dude was like, we're bringing in Carlos Hyde. He's going to be kind of our scat back. We're going to be passing it to him. And it was like, Carlos Hyde? This dude hasn't been good since he was playing at Ohio State. Like, what are you talking about? Why is that the guy that you're like, game changer? Like, okay, mister, now everybody's out of him. Like, what did you think? Everyone sucked? No one, you brought in Carlos Hyde. You thought you were playing against, Rutgers? Travis Etienne has played against top-tier competition, and he's performed against that competition. He's going to be really scary out of the backfield. And I think he's going to have a lot of games where it's like 10 catches, 80 yards, touchdown. They may lose by 38 points. But for fantasy, I think he's a very good draft. I think, especially in Dynasty, would love to have him. But Travis Etienne, I think he's going to look really good this year. But that doesn't mean the pick was good. At the same time, like,
it's hard though. It's hard though because like you can say that, but it's like if you pick a guy and he's good, it's hard to say the pick isn't good. Like I'm a strong believer in that because like people get mad like, oh, this team shouldn't have done this. This team there was this guy after him. It's like, yeah, but that guy worked for this team. So I still think it's hard. The problem is that you taking a running back early. I have a bigger problem with paying running backs though than drafting them early, but I think it's just because you look at the team, and you're like, dude, is Trevor Lawrence gonna live to like through his career in Jacksonville? And then
people
you see
talk
the
about the
first season.
Jaguar or the Bears, and they're like, oh, Justin Fields has no offensive line. The Jaguars are just as bad. Like, at least they extended their left tackle, I believe, or maybe it was their right tackle. But other than that, they're like, I mean, they're going out there with some piss poor offensive line play. It's gonna be interesting. But Matt, I think that's going to do it for tonight's stream. Do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't think so. I think that's probably all I got. But that was some fun topics here tonight.
Yeah, guys, let us know in your takes, top 5 running backs, top 5 front sevens, ETN, how you think he's going to perform, and other Raiders contenders. We're trying to post all of these clips, within the next couple of days, every single time. Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below. We stream Monday through Friday. We try to stream, typically not during the Padres game. Sometimes it's before, sometimes it's after. But thank you so much for coming through, and we'll see all of you again next time.